The rain that night wasn't gentle. It fell like the sky had broken open, sobbing over the city that had long forgotten how to feel. Streams of water raced down the sidewalks, merging with the glare of neon lights and the noise of honking cars. New York never stopped, not for storms, not for sorrow. But there, under the dim awning of a small corner bakery called Sweet Haven, sat a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 9, her small frame swallowed by a gray hoodie 2 sizes too big. Her shoes were soaked, the laces uneven, and her dark curls stuck to her forehead in wet strands. In front of her lay an empty paper cup, tilted, crushed slightly, half filled with rainwater. She didn't cry. She didn't call out. She only looked at the glass display of the bakery window, the cakes glowing under warm yellow light, untouched, perfect, behind a clean pane that separated her world from theirs. Her lips trembled as she whispered, almost to herself, "Do you have any expired cake?" The sound was fragile, so faint it could have been mistaken for the rain itself. People passed, shoes splashed, umbrellas tilted away. No one stopped. To them, she was just another blur in the rain, a shadow among thousands. But one man did stop. A black Rolls-Royce slowed to the curb. The tinted window slid down with a soft hum, and inside sat Alexander Kane, a man whose face had graced magazines, whose empire spanned continents, whose fortune could buy silence, power, and pride. Yet in that moment, he wasn't sure what made him tell his driver to stop. "Sir?" the driver asked, his tone cautious. Alex didn't answer. He stared out through the curtain of rain at the small figure by the bakery. Something in the way she sat, still, small, dignified despite the cold, unsettled him. His reflection in the glass seemed colder, hollower. He'd spent years perfecting that look, impenetrable, sharp, emotionless. But tonight it cracked. "Wait here," he muttered, and opened the door. Rain slammed against his tailored coat the second he stepped out. He pulled the collar up, eyes squinting against the downpour. The city smell, wet asphalt, exhaust, and something sweet from the bakery wrapped around him as he walked closer. The girl looked up, startled. Her eyes were not just gray, they were storm gray, reflecting the streetlights like broken mirrors. "Hey," he said softly, kneeling slightly to meet her eyes. "You okay?" She blinked fast, confused, almost ashamed. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, voice shaking. "I wasn't asking you, I thought maybe someone might have some expired cake." He frowned. "Expired cake?" She nodded, hugging her knees tighter. "Sometimes bakeries throw away old ones. I thought maybe—" Her words faded. "I'm just hungry. That's all." Alex felt his throat tighten. Expired cake. In his world, things didn't expire. They got replaced. Newer models, newer contracts, newer lives. But this child was asking for what everyone else threw away. Behind them, the bakery door opened. A woman in an apron leaned out, annoyed. "You again?" she snapped. "I told you, little girl, we don't give free food here. Go somewhere else before you scare customers." The girl looked down quickly. "Sorry, ma'am." The door slammed shut. For a long second, only rain answered. Then Alex spoke quietly. "What's your name?" "Lila," she said after a pause. "Lila Grace." He knelt lower, his polished shoes splashing in the puddles. "Lila," he repeated, as if testing how it sounded. "Where are your parents?" Her lips pressed together. "My mom," she started, voice trembling. "She used to bake. We had a bakery, but she died 2 months ago." The words fell like stones between them. He hesitated. "And your father?" She shook her head. "Never knew him. They sent me to a foster home, but—" She swallowed hard. "They yelled a lot. I ran away. I just wanted to find her bakery again. She used to say, 'There's always sweetness left, even in what's expired.'" Her voice cracked on the word sweetness. Something twisted inside him. Something old, buried, unfamiliar. He remembered his own childhood, a cramped apartment, his mother's soft voice, her laughter before the years of wealth and ambition buried her memory under concrete and gold. He stood abruptly and walked into the bakery. The warm air hit him like a wave, filled with sugar and vanilla. The owner, the same woman who had just dismissed Lila, looked up nervously. "Sir?" He pointed at the glass display. "That one," he said. "The old cake in the corner. The one you haven't sold." She blinked. "That's from yesterday. It's going to be tossed." "Good," he said. "I'll take it. The whole thing." The woman hesitated, then wrapped it up clumsily. Alex took it and turned back outside. Lila was still sitting where he'd left her, arms around her knees, watching the rain bounce off the streetlight glow. When he crouched again and set the box beside her, she stared at it in disbelief. "For me?" He nodded. "It's expired, apparently." Her small hands reached out hesitantly, trembling. She opened the lid slowly, like someone afraid it might disappear. The cake was simple. Vanilla, pink frosting, a little lopsided. But to her it might as well have been a treasure chest. She took a tiny bite, then another. Her eyes closed as she chewed, rain still dripping down her cheeks, mixing with the crumbs on her lips. Alex watched, something breaking open inside him. She wasn't greedy. She didn't devour it. She savored each piece like it was sacred. "You don't have to eat in the rain," he said quietly. She looked up. "I don't want to go inside. I might get the floor dirty." He smiled faintly, something between admiration and sorrow. "You won't." They sat together under the awning, sharing the cake in silence. The city around them kept rushing, unbothered. But for that brief moment, time slowed. "Was your mom's bakery here?" he asked. She nodded, swallowing a bite. "It used to be 2 streets over, but they closed it after she—" Her eyes watered. "She used to say people deserve something sweet, even if life isn't." He looked away, his own eyes stinging. He hadn't felt like this in years. The meetings, the mergers, the awards, all of it suddenly felt small compared to this simple act of sharing expired cake under the rain. After a while, the girl leaned her head against the wall and whispered, "Thank you, sir." "For what?" "For not looking away." He stared at her. The words struck deeper than she could ever know, because that's what he had been doing his entire life, looking away. From people, from pain, from the parts of himself he couldn't fix. A flash of lightning lit up the street. Her eyes glimmered, reflecting both innocence and exhaustion. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. "Here," he said, holding out some bills. "For food tomorrow." But she shook her head quickly. "No, sir, I don't need money, just thank you for listening." He froze. A billionaire offering wealth and being refused. The irony burned and healed at the same time. She wrapped the leftover cake in the paper and stood up, balancing the box carefully. "I'll save some for tomorrow," she said softly. He wanted to stop her, to ask where she'd go, to tell her she didn't have to be alone. But she was already stepping away into the rain, her silhouette small, but steady. He watched her go until she disappeared around the corner. Then, for the first time in years, Alexander Kane felt his heart ache. It wasn't the ache of loss or failure. It was the ache of rediscovery, the pain of remembering that he still had one. As he stood there in the rain, the neon reflection of the bakery window glimmered across the puddles, and her voice echoed in his mind again. "Do you have any expired cake?" He whispered it to himself, shaking his head. The phrase, so small, so humble, had shattered something vast inside him, something that no fortune could ever repair. When he got back into his car, the driver looked at him through the mirror. "Everything all right, sir?" Alex didn't answer right away. He stared at the cake crumbs still on his hand, the sweetness mixing with the scent of rain. "Drive," he said finally. His tone was low, thoughtful, fragile. As the car pulled into traffic, he looked out at the endless city, millions of lights, each one a story, a soul, a hunger. And somewhere in that chaos, a little girl was walking alone, clutching an expired cake like a piece of heaven. He didn't know her story yet, but he knew somehow that it had just become a part of his own. The next morning arrived in shades of gray. The storm had passed, but the city still glistened from the night's grief. In the penthouse suite at the top of the Aurelius Tower, Alexander Kane sat at the edge of his king-sized bed, the skyline stretching endlessly before him. Usually, mornings began with schedules, financial briefings, board meetings, calls to investors across time zones. His assistant would knock at precisely 7, handing him a fresh suit, coffee, and a stack of papers that all said the same thing in different fonts: profit. But today, the coffee was cold. The papers were untouched, because last night's voice hadn't left him. "Do you have any expired cake?" That small question looped in his head like a haunting melody. It wasn't just pity, it was something deeper, an ache in his chest that refused to go away. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake it off. "You gave her the cake." That's enough, but it wasn't. When his assistant Julian entered, cheerful as always, Alex barely looked up. "Morning, sir. You have the quarterly investor call in 30 minutes, and the charity gala speech notes are ready. Cancel it." Julian froze mid-sentence. "Sir? Cancel everything today." "Everything?" Alex nodded, standing up and buttoning his vest without emotion. "Yes, everything." Julian hesitated, used to his boss being decisive but never unpredictable. "May I ask why, sir?" Alex's eyes flickered, the reflection of the skyline glimmering in them. "I need to find someone." Julian blinked, unsure if it was a metaphor or a command. "Should I call security or—" "No, I'll handle it." He didn't explain. How could he? How do you tell someone that a whisper from a stranger had torn open years of numbness? He sat in the back of the Rolls-Royce again. But this time the world outside looked different. The towers, the billboards, the glass, all things he used to measure success, now felt hollow. He remembered the girl's trembling voice, her small hands clutching that old cake as if it were gold. "Stop at Sweet Haven," he said. The driver gave a short nod. Within minutes, they were there. The bakery looked the same, cozy, warm, unaware that it had been the setting of someone's awakening the night before. The same woman stood behind the counter. She recognized him instantly and straightened nervously. "Good morning, sir." "Back for another cake?" He looked around, scanning the sidewalk. No Lila, no small figure in gray. Just pedestrians rushing by, umbrellas glistening in the morning drizzle. "The little girl who was here last night?" he asked, voice low. "Have you seen her today?" The woman's expression softened, but only slightly. "No, sir. Poor thing comes around sometimes. Sits by the window, asks about old cakes. I told her to go to a shelter, but she's proud, that one. Never takes money. Just asks for what's thrown away. Do you know where she stays?" "Sorry, sir. These streets have too many corners and too few hearts. Kids like her disappear into them." Her words stung more than he expected. He nodded and turned to leave. As the car pulled away, Alex found himself lost in thought. He couldn't stop seeing her eyes, storm gray, haunted but kind. They reminded him of his own, long ago. He had grown up in a cramped apartment above a laundromat in Queens. His mother, Amelia, used to work double shifts at a small bakery to pay for his books. Every night she brought home the leftover pastries, expired, as the bakery called them. But to him, they were treasures. He could still remember her laughter as she handed him a stale croissant, saying, "You see this, Alex? Just because the world says something's old doesn't mean it's worthless." He hadn't thought about that in decades. When she died, he had promised himself he'd never be poor again. He'd clawed his way into the empire of the rich. Stock deals, real estate, tech takeovers. But somewhere in that climb, he had buried her words under mountains of money. Now, because of one starving girl and one question, the past had come roaring back. He leaned his head against the glass window, watching raindrops trail down. For the first time, the city outside didn't look like opportunity. It looked like loneliness. By evening, he couldn't resist going back. The bakery's lights were dimming, closing for the night, but he stayed across the street, waiting. Minutes turned into hours. The rain began again, a soft drizzle, then heavier. And then she appeared. Lila, her hoodie darker now from the wet, her small frame hunched against the cold. She moved to the same spot by the window, curling up beneath the awning. Alex felt a strange relief flood him, like seeing someone you didn't realize you needed to see again. He stepped out of the car, walking across the street slowly. His expensive shoes splashed through puddles, uncaring this time. When she looked up and recognized him, her eyes widened. "Sir?" "You're out here again?" he said gently. She nodded, embarrassed. "It's okay. I found a place under the bridge to sleep. I just came here because it smells nice. Like my mom's bakery used to." Her voice cracked on Mom's. He sat beside her without hesitation, ignoring the rain seeping into his coat. "You shouldn't be alone out here. I'm used to it," she whispered. He looked at her, really looked at her. The way she spoke softly, almost afraid to disturb the air, the way her small hands were folded neatly in her lap. It wasn't just hunger, it was dignity despite despair, and that broke him. "You know," he said quietly, "people say money buys comfort. But it can't buy peace. It can't buy moments like this." She turned to him, confused. "You're rich, aren't you?" He smiled sadly. "Too rich, and too poor at the same time." She frowned, trying to understand. He continued, voice shaking now. "I have everything people want, houses, cars, power. But when I go home, it's quiet. Too quiet. No one waiting. No one smiling, just silence." Her little face softened. "That sounds lonely," he nodded. "It is." The honesty of that moment hit him like lightning. He hadn't admitted loneliness to anyone in 20 years, not even to himself. Then Lila said something that shattered the last wall around his heart. She looked down at the puddles and whispered, "Maybe you just forgot what sweetness feels like." It was the same thing his mother used to tell him when he'd cry as a child. "Sweetness always finds its way back, Alex." He froze. The air around him felt electric, every sound muted except her voice. "Sweetness," he echoed softly. Lila smiled faintly, shy but wise in her own way. "My mom said, there's always sweetness left, even in what's expired." And right there, that single sentence, cracked something wide open inside him. His throat tightened. He turned his head away so she wouldn't see the tears threatening to fall. But one escaped anyway, sliding down his cheek into the rain. A billionaire? Broken not by failure or loss, but by kindness. That was the moment his heart truly shattered, not from pain, but from remembering what it meant to feel. He took a deep breath and stood. "Lila," he said, his voice trembling. "Come with me." She blinked, startled. "Where?" "Somewhere safe." "You can't stay here." She hesitated, clutching her small bag, a torn piece of fabric with a single toy bear peeking out. "Are you sure?" He nodded firmly. "Yes." She looked down, conflicted. "I don't want to cause trouble, sir." "You won't," he said softly. "You've already done the opposite." The driver opened the car door. For a moment she froze, uncertain. The interior looked like another world, warm leather, gold trim, soft lights. A palace compared to her cold pavement, but something in Alex's eyes made her trust him. As she stepped inside, wrapping her damp hoodie tighter, she whispered, "It smells nice." "Like sugar," he smiled faintly. "You'll get used to it." The car door closed, muffling the city's noise. As they drove off, Alex looked at her reflection in the glass. Small, fragile, but peaceful now. He had spent years collecting art worth millions. But in that reflection, he realized he had just found the most priceless thing of all: purpose. In the quiet of his penthouse, she sat on the edge of the couch, unsure where to place her hands. He offered her a towel, a blanket, and a bowl of soup. "Eat," he said gently. She did, and slowly, politely, thanking him between every bite. When she finished, she looked up shyly. "Why are you helping me?" He thought for a moment. "Because last night you reminded me of something I forgot." "What's that?" He looked out the window, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "That the richest people aren't the ones who have the most. They're the ones who remember how to care." She didn't fully understand, but she smiled anyway. That same small, innocent smile that had broken him once and now rebuilt him piece by piece. Later, when she had fallen asleep on the couch, Alex stood in the doorway watching her. The blanket rose and fell with each breath. Her face, finally peaceful, seemed to carry a quiet grace his world had long lost. He whispered to himself, almost afraid of the sound of it, "You brought sweetness back into my life." "Little one," the rain outside began again, tapping gently against the glass. Not like sorrow this time, but like rhythm, heartbeat, renewal. For years, Alexander Kane's heart had been silent. Philosophy. There's always sweetness left. Deepens, and both characters start healing one another. Inside the penthouse, silence stretched, soft, peaceful, and foreign to Alexander Kane. For years, silence had been his companion, heavy and unkind. But this morning it felt different because now there was breathing in the silence, soft, steady, gentle. The sound of a little girl curled on the couch beneath a warm blanket. Lila, her small hand clutched the corner of the fabric as though afraid the comfort might vanish if she loosened her grip. Alex stood by the window, a cup of untouched coffee in his hand, watching her sleep. She looked impossibly small against the vastness of his home. Marble floors, glass walls, towering art pieces. Yet somehow, she belonged there more than anything else. He found himself whispering, "You make this place feel alive again." For years, this penthouse had been nothing but a glass box filled with trophies of his ambition, proof of what he'd earned, but also of what he'd lost. And now, with a single child asleep in his living room, that emptiness had started to crumble. When Lila finally stirred, the morning light painted her face gold. She blinked awake, confused for a moment, then remembered. Her eyes darted around the luxurious room, wide and cautious. "Good morning," Alex said softly, smiling. She froze, then whispered back, "Good morning." "Sir, you can call me Alex," he said, her brows furrowed. "You're not angry?" He laughed quietly. "Why would I be angry?" "Because I fell asleep here. I didn't mean to, I just haven't slept warm in a long time." Something twisted inside his chest. That simple confession, so pure and painful. "You can sleep here as long as you need," he said. "You're safe now." She hesitated, still unsure how to respond to kindness. But when she saw the breakfast table, warm bread, fruit, milk, her eyes softened. She approached timidly, then stopped. "Can I really eat this?" "Yes, everything," he said. "No one's taking it away." The moment she took the first bite, her eyes glistened. "It's fresh," she whispered in awe, as though she'd forgotten what that tasted like. He smiled faintly. "You like cake, don't you?" She nodded. It was the only good smell left in our street. The bakery down there always threw away old ones. But even old cakes taste sweet if you share them. Alex felt a lump in his throat. "You used to share them with someone?" She smiled, small, fragile, but real. "My mom, she used to work in a bakery too. Before she got sick, she said cakes are little pieces of happiness. They don't fix things, but they make hard days softer." Her voice trembled as she said it, and Alex stayed silent, letting her continue. She said, Lila looked down, fingers tracing the edge of her plate. "There's always sweetness left, even in what's expired." The words hung in the air like a prayer. Alex felt them sink into him. Deep, honest, unshakable. It was the same truth he'd buried years ago, spoken now by the child who had unknowingly resurrected it. For a long time after breakfast, Alex sat in his office, staring at the skyline, lost in thought. He remembered his own mother's hands, dusted with flour, gentle as they shaped dough into little stars and hearts. He remembered sitting by the oven as a boy, waiting for the timer to ring, his mother humming softly. "Sweetness isn't about sugar," Alex, she'd once told him. It's about kindness, the kind that never expires. He hadn't thought of that moment in 20 years, and now, one little girl's whisper had brought it all. Back, he stood abruptly and walked to the living room where Lila was drawing something on a napkin. A small cake with candles and a smiling woman beside it. "Is that your mom?" he asked. She nodded proudly. I remember her face best when she smiled. Even when she was tired, she'd still make cake for everyone on the street. "What happened to her?" he asked gently. Lila paused, her pencil trembling. "She got sick. We didn't have money for the medicine. I tried to sell the oven, but no one wanted it. After she went to heaven, I kept coming to bakeries, just to smell it again." Alex closed his eyes, struggling to breathe. The story felt like a mirror, a painful reflection of what his own life might have become if luck hadn't chosen him. He knelt beside her. "You're very brave, Lila." She shook her head. "No, I just try to remember her words. She said, 'When people forget kindness, the world starts tasting bitter.'" He looked at her, a small child who had lost everything, yet still spoke with hope, and for the first time in decades, Alexander Kane felt ashamed of his wealth. Later that afternoon, he took her to the rooftop garden. It overlooked the entire city, silver and gold stretching to the horizon. "Whoa," she whispered. "You can see everything from here." "Yes," he said quietly. "But when you're this high up, you stop seeing people." She tilted her head. "Then come down," he laughed softly. "Maybe I should." They sat together on a bench, the wind brushing through the flowers. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lila said, "When I asked for expired cake, everyone looked away." "Like I wasn't real," Alex nodded, guilt pressing heavy in his chest. "People forget what hunger looks like. Not just hunger for food, hunger for kindness." She smiled at that. "You didn't forget." He looked at her, eyes glistening. "Maybe I did, until you reminded me." They sat quietly after that. The kind of silence that heals instead of hurts. As the sun melted into the city's edge, Alex entered the kitchen, a place he hadn't stepped into in years. His chefs usually handled everything, but tonight he wanted to make something himself. He rolled up his sleeves awkwardly, scanning the counter like a stranger in his own home. Flour, eggs, sugar, milk. Lila peeked from behind the doorway, amused. "You're going to bake?" He smirked. "Don't laugh. I used to help my mom with this." "Really?" She giggled. "You? Mr. Fancy Suit Man?" He chuckled. "Believe it or not, I used to get flour all over my face." She covered her mouth, laughing softly for the first time. "I want to see that." "You might," he said, cracking an egg. No promises. As they mixed the ingredients, the air filled with laughter, light and clumsy, but real. Lila hummed an old tune her mother used to sing. When the cake was finally in the oven, the warm smell filled the penthouse, sweet, nostalgic, comforting. She leaned on the counter, eyes shining. "It smells like home," he nodded. "Yes, it does." When the timer finally rang, Alex pulled out the cake, imperfect but golden. He placed it on the counter and handed her a small fork. "You first." She took a bite, eyes closing in bliss. "It's perfect," he smiled faintly. "Even if it's not," she looked up at him. "That's the point. Even if something's not perfect, it can still be sweet. And just like that." The words hit him again, her mother's wisdom, reborn in her daughter's voice. "There's always sweetness left, even in what's expired." He repeated it softly, as if sealing it into his soul. That night, as Lila fell asleep again, Alex sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. For once he didn't see numbers, deals, or profits. He saw faces, streets, people, possibility. The world outside hadn't changed, but he had. The next morning, Alex called his team. For the first time in years, his voice sounded alive. "Julian," he said on the phone, "I want to reopen something." "Another company, sir?" He smiled. "A bakery." There was a pause on the line. "A bakery, sir?" "Yes," Alex said, his tone soft but firm. "One that never throws away cake, ever." Julian hesitated. "What should we call it?" Alex looked toward the couch where Lila slept peacefully and whispered the name that now meant everything. Sweet Haven. The morning came quietly. The city outside was humming again. Horns, footsteps, the restless rhythm of another day. Sunlight spilled through the massive windows of the penthouse, painting gold streaks across the marble floor. But for Alexander Kane, something was wrong. He felt it before he even opened his eyes, an emptiness heavier than silence. The couch where Lila had been sleeping was empty. The blanket, folded neatly, her little shoes gone. At first, he smiled faintly, thinking she must be in the kitchen. But when he called her name, the sound echoed unanswered through the vast apartment. Lila? No response. He checked every room, the guest bedroom, the study, the balcony. Nothing. His chest tightened. A strange panic began to rise. She wouldn't just leave. Would she? Then on the table near the window he saw it, a small napkin folded into a square. His name was written on it in crooked, childlike letters. He opened it with trembling fingers. Thank you for the cake and the warm bed. You're very kind, Mr. Alex, but I don't belong in houses like this. My mom used to say, don't stay where your heart doesn't fit. Please don't worry. I'll be fine. A tear splashed onto the paper before he realized it had fallen. He whispered her name, once, softly, as though saying it might bring her back. But only the city answered, indifferent and loud. He stood there for a long time, the note shaking in his hand, until the silence became unbearable. Then, for the first time in years, Alexander Kane didn't care about meetings, contracts, or empires. He grabbed his coat, left the penthouse, and went back into the rain. The search begins, the city felt different. Now. Colder. The same streets he once viewed, from his penthouse windows, now towered over him, merciless and gray. He retraced his steps, the bakery, the bridge, the subway entrance. Every shadow made his heart lurch. He asked strangers, described her face, showed her photo from his phone. She's about this tall. Brown hair. Wears a gray hoodie, too big for her. Most shook their heads. Some didn't even stop to listen. At one point he stood in the middle of the sidewalk, drenched and shaking, whispering, "Where are you, Lila?" "Das du." Hours passed. Daylight dimmed into the soft ache of dusk. Finally, an old man sitting by a food cart nodded toward a narrow alley. "I seen a girl like that earlier," he said. "Said she was looking for a bakery that's closed down." Alex froze. "The old one on Waverly Street?" "Yeah, that's the one." Without another word, Alex ran. The old bakery stood forgotten. Boarded windows, cracked sign. Letters faded to ghosts. Grace's Bakes, it read faintly under layers of dust and rain. He pushed open the door. The bell above it gave a broken chime. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and old sugar, faint traces of what once was. And there, in the corner, he saw her. Lila sat on the floor, hugging her knees, a tiny figure swallowed by the silence. Her hoodie was soaked, her face pale. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Lila," he said softly. She looked up, eyes wide with surprise. Then guilt. "You found me," he knelt down. "You scared me half to death." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to, I wanted to find this place. It's where my mom worked. I thought if I came back here, maybe I could remember her better." Alex felt his throat tighten. "You didn't have to do it alone," she shrugged weakly. "I'm used to alone." Something inside him broke at those words. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small thermos. "I brought hot chocolate," he said. Still warm, her eyes widened. She took it carefully, cupping it in her small hands. When she sipped it, color returned to her face. "It tastes like her," she whispered. "My mom used to make it like this, with extra milk so it wouldn't burn my tongue." He smiled faintly. "Then your mom was smarter than me." She giggled, a small sound in the dark place. Then, as her smile faded, she said quietly, "I didn't mean to make you worry." He looked at her, really looked. The exhaustion, the fear, the innocence. And he realized this wasn't about pity or responsibility. It was about connection, the kind that neither wealth nor power could ever buy. He said softly, "You didn't make me worry, Lila. You made me care." They sat together on the bakery floor, surrounded by ghosts of the past. Dust motes danced in the faint light that slipped through broken boards. Lila traced the outline of a cracked counter with her finger. "My mom used to bake cakes right there. She'd hum when she worked, said every cake had a little bit of her love in it." Alex nodded, eyes glistening. "Maybe that's why people came here." She smiled sadly. "Nobody comes anymore." He reached out, placed his hand gently over hers. "Then maybe it's time someone did again." She looked up, unsure what he meant. He continued, "I want to fix this place, reopen it. We'll make it warm again, sweet again. Not just for us, for everyone who's ever been hungry." Her eyes widened. "You'd do that?" "I would," he said firmly, "but only if you help me." She blinked, confused. "Me? I don't know how to bake." He smiled. "You know what sweetness is. That's more important." A single tear rolled down her cheek, not from sadness, but disbelief. She whispered, "Nobody's ever said that to me." "Well," he said softly, "they should have." The rain returned before they could leave. Alex carried her in his arms through the downpour, shielding her with his coat. When they reached his car, she was shivering. "Do you trust me?" he asked. She nodded instantly. Yes. Those words, so simple, so complete, filled him with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. They drove through the rain in silence until they reached the city's edge, an old shelter Alex had funded years ago but had never actually visited. As he walked in with Lila, the volunteers looked startled. He rarely appeared in person. "Mr. Kane?" one asked. "You're not here as a donor," he said. "I'm here to help." He helped carry supplies, talked to children, served food. Lila watched him in awe. It was like watching two worlds collide. Power, meeting humility, and kindness being reborn. Later, one of the little boys at the shelter tugged on Lila's sleeve. "Is that your dad?" She froze, then smiled shyly. "Maybe. Kind of." Alex overheard. He didn't correct it. He just smiled. That night, after tucking Lila into a warm bed at the shelter, Alex stood outside under the soft streetlight, rain misting around him. He finally understood. For years, he'd been building towers, reaching for the sky, thinking the higher he climbed, the more he'd matter. But all he'd done was lose sight of the ground, of people, of connection, of the simple sweetness that made life worth living. And now, one little girl who only wanted expired cake had brought him back to earth. He whispered to the night, as if speaking to the universe, "Thank you for sending her." Behind him, Lila's small voice called, "Alex?" He turned. "Yeah?" She smiled sleepily. "You're not broken anymore." He froze. "What makes you say that?" "Because you're smiling like my mom used to." He swallowed hard, fighting tears. "Good night, Lila." "Good night," she murmured, curling into her blanket. As he watched her drift into sleep, he made a silent promise that he would never let the world forget her story. That kindness, once found, would never expire again. Outside, the rain stopped. For the first time in years, the city didn't feel cold anymore.